Hi, and welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We've got an interesting show today. We're moving up north. We're going to go all the way to Harbor Springs and cover the Ugotta Regatta at the Little Traverse Yacht Club and get an idea of buoy racing. And we've been covering a lot of the long distance offshore racing. We get a chance to talk to Debi Schoenherr, who is the Vice Commodore of the Little Traverse Yacht Club, as well as the race director. And she's got a bit of experience both as a racer and a race organizer. We're going to talk to her. And then we want to jump into the J70 fleet. We think that's an interesting boat. We've covered a lot of the big boats over the last few weeks. And this week, we're going to talk to first Mark Allen. Mark's going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be on his J70 up in Harbor Springs. And then we talk to Don Glover, another veteran of the J70 fleet, and talk about the race. And there's been some interesting discussions about whether it wasn't a typical Ugotta Regatta. But I also want to talk a little bit about just the importance of the Ugotta Regatta. And I think that'll come out with this show. In the next couple of shows, we're also going to bring you some J70 information and check in with a bunch of folks in the northern part of the state and kind of get a feel for sailing up in the top of the mitt. So hopefully it'll be a good show. Stay tuned, and we'll be back in a second. We're talking with the Vice Commodore from the Little Traverse Yacht Club, who is the sponsor of the Ugotta Regatta race that happened this past weekend. We're talking with Debi Schoenherr. And first of all, Debi, thanks for joining us and kind of maybe talk a little bit about the past weekend. You guys had a great race.
Well, yes, we did. And thanks for having me, Greg. I have to say it was a little bit of an unusual Ugotta weekend because our typical doctor really never came in. We have a prevailing wind up here that in the summertime blows consistently out of the west, and it builds all through the afternoon. But this weekend, Mother Nature just didn't cooperate, so we had to make do. It was still a beautiful weekend. We did have breeze, and in fact, a little too much on Saturday, possibly. But some very tricky conditions, which put a lot of pressure on the race committee.
Now, Vice Commodore at your club, is that person who's in charge then of the regatta every year? Is that how that you become race director because of being vice chairman, or is it a dual role?
Well, it's supposed to be the Vice Commodore, but unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, I've done a lot of event management over the years down at Bayview and other areas. And when I came in as Vice Commodore, I've pretty much been wearing the hat ever since for about 10 years.
Okay.
Now I've been running the regatta, but with the help of the Vice Commodore at the time, except this year I was the Vice Commodore.
So it just worked out that way.
Yeah.
In your role as race director, you're responsible for all that goes on. You did not have a race last year. You did have a race last year.
Oh, we had a very unfortunate circumstance last year. We tried desperately to run the regatta, and we were all set to go. The boats were here, and the day before it was supposed to start, we had a huge COVID incident at the yacht club, and the board of directors pulled regatta.
Okay. I know that the 52s ran with I think the Manitou 500, or was some kind of race that they had put on after as a replacement for the Chicago to Mac race.
Well, actually, yes, we had everybody here, and since we couldn't do it, the 52s ran their own racing for the 3 days, and Ed Fleury from Sail 22, I believe, jumped on the bandwagon and ran races for the 2 or 3 days for some of the one design classes that we have. So most of the sailors actually got to go sailing last year. It just wasn't under our hat.
Okay. When you take a year off for the pandemic, now that you've had some experience, like you said, you've been at it a decade, do you think that, dumb question, the pandemic certainly hurt sail racing, but how much in terms of the organizational part of it? Did you lose bodies, or was it just sort of everybody kind of gradually got back to the volunteering part of the race?
It really wasn't too bad. We did lose some bodies. We still have people that have their own reasons to be skeptical and didn't sign up possibly this year, but we definitely had the core and enough volunteers that we needed.
I asked the question because I know that the Bayview Mac race lost a lot of Canadian guys because they couldn't come across on the border. So numbers are down slightly in a lot of the races, and I think that's just one of those things that happens with the process. I'm going to ask a novice question, because I think the core folks of sail racing understand how big a race that your race is, sort of the biggest race at the end of the year. It kind of ends the season. I know the Trans-Superior race it kicks off on Saturday, and I know Bay Harbor is holding a 52. My question is that, do we really know how good a race yours is down here or other parts of the lake?
Well, I can tell you right now, I think a lot of people do, unless they have never attended our regatta. I believe it's probably the most unique regatta on the Great Lakes. Happens every July. And I like to refer to it as the end of the July trifecta, since we always had the 2 max and then regatta in the month of July, a week apart. We have people have come from all over the country to this regatta. In fact, Terry Hutchinson wrote a beautiful article in Sail World magazine, I believe in 2018, when he joined WinQuest one year. And he basically said, if you haven't been there, you better put this on your bucket list. And we have people that do travel from quite a distance, and the Great Lakes sailors love it.
Because it's in the bay and because it's a buoy race, after having those 2 long up the lake runs, it's got to be just a pleasure for the sailors, because it certainly challenges a lot more skills, different skills, not necessarily, it certainly challenges different kinds of skills than it might normally challenge in the MAC or the Chicago to MAC.
Yeah, I think what makes it most unique is the fact that we basically do 2 circles. But when I say 2 circles, I mean, we do one design racing, windward leeward buoy racing, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But the biggest boats that do the buoy racing on the windward leewards on Friday join our tour course. We call that Tour of the Bay on Saturday and Sunday. And the Tour of the Bay is basically mid-distance course. There's 3 different classes that race different courses, anywhere from 12 nautical miles to 22 nautical miles. We do have fixed marks, and the course is set up that it takes you all across the bay, so you get all the scenery, and it's basically a windward leeward course unless the wind shifts. And that's unique, and people don't get to do mid-distance or any kind of distance racing much anymore, other than either an offshore race or everything else is windward leeward buoy racing. And I think that's exactly what the sailors really love.
One of the things I think is really cool about your race, later in this show, we're going to talk to a couple of the J70 skippers, and you guys had a huge fleet this year for the J70s. That's got to be an encouraging sign for one design, I would think.
Yeah, we had a pretty big fleet this year. I believe it was around 13 or 14 boats. Actually, it was down. We had 22 J70s about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And our Melges 24 fleet, which is very hotly contested, was also 14 boats. So we had 2 big one design fleets.
I'm going to ask another novice dumb question. Aileron 28s. Am I saying that right? Aileron 28s?
Alarian.
Well, I'm close. For those who might not know the boat, explain what that is.
The Alarian 28s are beautiful, classic boats. They're close to 30 feet long. They race main and jib only, at least in our neck of the woods. Other areas do race them with chutes or with overlapping jibs. We have a local fleet here. It's actually about 13, but I believe we only had 8 of them race in Regatta. I don't know. I mean, Craig Lewick of Scuttlebutt owns one out on the West Coast, so he knows all about them, and I'm sure a lot of the readers and viewers do.
Yeah. I asked just because I saw a large contingent in the scoring, and I wasn't familiar with the boat. Because I'm not familiar doesn't make it unpopular. I'm asking because there's a lot of folks who might not know. That's the reason I was asking the question.
Well, these days I actually race on one of those.
Do you really?
Up here in our club racing, yes.
You grew up in Grosse Pointe, you went to South, and my question to you is St. Clair, Lake St. Clair similar to the Little Traverse Bay? Are there similarities?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Because
Lake St. Stupid, as I call it. It's got its own twerks and perks, but we don't get the really light air and the kind of more fluky funneling conditions like they get as it funnels into the Detroit River down there. As I said, we have typically much stronger breeze up here. We don't have to sit around and wait for a breeze to come in over and over. And when the doctor comes in, boy, she is just, or he, whichever one it is a beauty. I mean, she typically comes in the summer about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and comes in about 12, and by 4 in the afternoon is blowing 18 right out of the west and just never changes direction. It's beautiful.
Please explain what the doctor is.
Well, we're a very unique setup up here. This bay that we're on actually runs east and west. And so the land formations all the way around coming in from Lake Michigan and into this bay causes a strange, I guess you call it a thermal, basically, or a prevailing breeze. And it directs the breeze so that we get this westerly coming around the shore and into the bay, which is very prevalent up here.
I've got to think that that's also one of the weather factors as to why Nubs Knob and Boyne Highlands get so much snow as compared to a lot of other areas.
Well, absolutely the same thing. We are in the snow belt and we get the lake effect snow for the same reasons.
You can drive up and not see snow and all of a sudden turn the corner going up towards Nubs Knob, and all of a sudden you see flakes when you didn't see them, a mile and a half behind you. Briefly want to talk a little bit about Little Traverse Yacht Club. You guys were formed in 1895, and I'm not sure if folks know that you guys were one of the oldest clubs in the Midwest.
Well, yes, we were. And we just celebrated our 125th anniversary last year. We did not actually have a clubhouse until, let me see if I got this one right now off the top of my head. In 1965 was when we actually purchased and had the clubhouse that we own today. And this year is our 60th anniversary of hosting Regatta. It was kind of fun. It started out as a real fun family fair when we started right after the 2 Max. And seriously, I mean, we used to give awards for the boat with the most crew members on it. And I raced on a boat one year. Everybody in the Great Lakes knows who TK Lowry was on his J41 Tomahawk. We won the award with 42 people racing on a J41.
Oh my God.
So it used to be just kind of fun and crazy and a really relaxing weekend. But as has happened in sailing all across the country over the past 15 or so years, competition has really become important and strong. So we've kind of followed suit, and now it's a very competitive regatta, and some of that fun factor is gone, not on the shore, but on the water.
As part of that discussion, is it hurt if you're not rich to be able to race at the higher levels? You guys have a lot of great boats, but it's become a pretty expensive sport. I mean, obviously at the top end, you're talking about $1 million boats, if not more.
Well, one of my favorite lines is, it's not the cost of the boat, it's the cost of campaigning it.
Yeah.
However, we have, I think J70s are very reasonably priced boats. I think that's why they're so popular.
Yep.
Melga's 24s can be gotten especially used for a fairly decent price. but sure, you're not, you go up to we have the 70s and the Great Lakes 52s and some pretty big Perf A and B boats. Those are pricey. I think that all the way across the nation, it has become a little more expensive to go sailboat racing.
My favorite boat was a 105 footer that raced this year in one of the races, and maybe both. It's got its own fireplace. When you got a fireplace in a boat, that's
White Hawk.
right. That's an amazing boat when you have.
Well, they have a bathtub too.
Yeah. No, I keep saying, and there's a thread in this show, it's not sailing when you're wearing a helmet. So monohulls kind of capture the attention of maybe the less informed about the racing world, but I think it's growing because of social media, but I also think it's getting more spectators than necessarily participants. And I think that's something that maybe changes. I point out behind me is the look off of your deck towards the water part. You guys have a road though. You have one of the unique yacht clubs. You actually have a working road between your house, between your clubhouse and the water, but it's a pretty non-traveled road. So it's pretty safe for everybody.
Yeah, we have a lot of signs there in a crosswalk. This is a little community, and we're very serious about crosswalks and cars stopping for pedestrians. So it's pretty good. We have a special sign because the junior sailors also go across this road to get to the dock for Little Traverse sailors.
What happens at Little Traverse then now the rest of the summer, since the Ugotta is I'm assuming the Ugotta's got to be the pinnacle of the summer. Is that fair to say?
Well, actually, yes, it is the one and only large regatta that we do every year. But we have club racing, on Tuesdays and Saturdays. 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks at this point. Next weekend, we have the Beaver Island race, and we have a contingency that race from our bay over to Beaver Island, spend the night and race back on Sunday. Little Traverse Sailors is going strong 5 days a week with, and then dinghy racing Monday nights and Thursday nights, and the little kids and the bugs, which is cute as a bug, race on Wednesday nights right off the club. You could actually see from the clubhouse where they're racing. So we're racing all summer long, but just not the same level as Ugotta Regatta.
You're lucky enough to be in a fairly close proximity. I'm guessing 1,000 yards from downtown Harbor Springs, which if it is not the prettiest city in northern Michigan, it's got to be in the top 3. Certainly it's a great place to live and a great place to sail. So having the bay having lived in San Diego a lot of my life, you had the bay at San Diego, but you can still go to the ocean. What's nice about Harbor Springs is you can still sail on the bay. And if you want to go out to the bigger water, you still have a chance to go out to the lake. So that's kind of cool too.
Absolutely.
Listen, I appreciate your time. Best luck to the rest of the summer. And I just want to thank you very much for your time.
Well, no worries. And thanks for giving me a call. And I hope everybody comes and joins us next year at Ugotta Regatta.
That was Debi Schoenherr, the Vice Commodore for the Little Traverse Yacht Club and the race director for the Ugotta Regatta, one of the better races in the Great Lakes. And we appreciate talking with her. I hope you learned a little bit about the race. Up next is Mark Allen and Don Glover talking about that J70 fleet. Hopefully you get some insight to a bit of a different boat. We've been talking a lot about big boats lately, and this, I think, will be a really insightful conversation. So we will be back in a second.
We're talking with Mark Allen, a member of the Pontiac Yacht Club and a member of also the Crescent Lake Yacht Club, who was at the Ugotta Regatta for the Little Traverse Yacht Club, the race this past week. And Mark, you race a J70, which was a huge fleet. We're going to talk about the J70 fleet. First of all, thank you for coming aboard and talk a little bit about the race this weekend.
Was going up to Ugotta for people that have never sailed to Ugotta. Sailing in the Little Traverse Bay generally throws some fantastic conditions at you when the wind comes out of the west. You get big waves, big breeze, a lot of great challenging conditions. This weekend, we got 3 different days of racing up there, which was really challenging and actually, brought out the strengths in different teams each day. The first day was what I call typical Cass Lake conditions. Wind was out of the north and they sailed us up real close to shore. So it was real shifty and looking for pressure were key. So that was fun. The next day was classic Harbor Springs weather. It was blowing strong upper teens, low 20s out of the west. Got big waves. They took us way out into the bay. So there weren't any real land effects to deal with. It was just full on.
How much sailing have you done on that bay?
That'll be my third time racing there. All three times were J70 racing.
We talked, Debi Schoenherr was the vice commodore and the race director at the race this past year. And she talked about the doctor, which is the weather. And that's the term that's used. And the doctor wasn't in because it was coming from different directions.
Right.
So that's part of that whole argument. The cool part of for those, and that's kind of the cool part of the race. This race is it certainly isn't Mac race Chicago or Bayview, but it's a great way to end the season. And I'm not sure people realize just how big a race this is. We kind of concentrate for 2 weeks on the big boats, and then we kind of come back to have sort of buoy racing. And I think that's one of the reasons we're having a conversation. The J70 fleet is very competitive. Now, they were down a few boats this year, but I think you guys had 14 or 15 boats this year in the campaign.
14. Yeah, and the J70, it's just the fleet nationwide, worldwide, is just the most competitive fleet there is out there. I think in one design sailing, it's really, really tough, and the best sailors are in that fleet.
What's good about sailing on Little Traverse Bay in relationship to how fast you can go, and just in terms of the kind of courses? Because this buoy course, you guys do.
I feel pretty lucky that we got to sail 3 days of Windward Lewards and not do the Tour of the Bay races. So that's pretty good that we got to do that.
What's fun about the J70?
It's deceivingly simple. The boat, it's funny, most one designs that I race, the more simple the boat is, the tougher it is to do well, because there's all sorts of little fine-tuned, little finesse things that you have to learn about the boat to do really well. The J70 is probably the most fun is when it's really blowing hard and you can get it up on a plane and go ripping and do, upper teens. When you're going 18 knots in a J, there's nothing much better than that.
Is the J70 sort of replaced in history the J24? Is that a fair statement? I know they're different boats, but J24s were such a large fleet for a long time, and it seems like J70s are growing in popularity. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They've been really probably the fastest growing one design fleet in the world, and I wouldn't. The comparison to J24s probably makes sense, but what I saw was at a national level, all the top sailors from the Melgus 24 fleet have come over into the J70 fleet.
Okay.
And now we've got all those pros. Like at a national event, the top 20 boats are all pros, and it makes it really tough. But then again, it's really amazing to be able to sail against that caliber of talent also. Typically
about 4 people on that boat? Or is it more?
Yep, 4 people. Nope, it's 4. Oh, you can sail with 5. A lot of people do sail with 5 when it's windier. 4 is, it takes 4 to get it done. And 5 people, what I found, 5 people in the cockpit is really crowded.
Okay. I know this is a crazy question, but I don't know the size of a J70. And I ask that question because I look up at seeing sails all the time when you go back and forth on lakes, and there's J everything, 111s, 105s. I'm not sure Jay could ever figure out, Mr. Johnstone could ever figure out that maybe they just make some sort of common denominator that we could all understand. What size is a J70?
A J70 it's over 23 feet.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm waiting for the J6.5 to come out now.
What's the weight on that boat?
The boat all up weighs 1,700 pounds, or just over that. Yeah.
So very, very trailerable, very.
Oh, yeah. The keel retracts like a Melgus 24. So the boat rides low in a trailer, and it trails like a dream. We take our boat to Florida every winter, and it's a piece of cake.
Fairly expensive?
I'd say moderately. Initial price is rather high, but not for a 24-foot racing boat.
Okay.
All the sails are Dacron, so sail replacement is not that expensive.
Some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a talk that there was a J70 stadium fleet, kind of campaigning from place to place. Is this kind of a race equivalent to that stadium racing?
No, stadium racing, if you're not familiar with it, and we had a lot of fun doing this at Grosse Pointe Yacht Club a few years ago. Super short races. The races last like 6-7 minutes to do a 4-leg race.
Okay.
It's really close to shore, to the the yacht club so that spectators can watch it. And it's really close, really fast action. You don't stop on the boat because it's like you start and suddenly you're at the weather mark, get the kite up. By the time you get the kite up and go, jibe, you're at the leeward mark. And it's super fast paced action. It's a lot of fun, but it's a completely different animal than like Ugotta, Harbor Springs. We were sailing on Saturday. We were sailing 1.3 nautical mile legs. And that's, you can leg out, you can focus on boat speed and not boat handling, focus on tactics and leverage a lot more with much longer courses. So completely different animal.
When you're on a 24 and you see 52s and 70s and Santa Cruzes and the Boatines and all the other boats, that's got to make, it's got to just be fun to watch. I know you're racing and you're watching the race course, but to see all of the talent that was up there has got to be kind of a cool experience.
That's definitely one of the pluses of Ugotta is being able to hang out at the parties with all the everybody, the crews, the top guys from all the big boats, that you normally don't see anywhere else.
Yeah, the 52s are fun to watch. I had a chance to be on one last year.
Oh yeah,
I've never been 25 miles an hour on a sailboat before. It's crazy. As a cruiser, as a slow, I've got an old one, and it's just fun. You grew up sailing, I assume, on a smaller boat, and because I know you've been a longtime member at the Pontiac Yacht Club and a recent member at Crescent. So, talk a little bit about your younger years.
I started racing. I sailed boats my whole life. Beach boats up in Traverse City and spending summers up there. But I got introduced to racing in 1994 on the CNC 41 Quicks. Ken Brown, David Sandlin got me on that boat. And so I started on racing big boats and did that for a bunch of years. 1997, got invited to sail on a Lightning. And at that point, I was a big boat sailor. I'm like, what? Wow, what's that? A 19-foot little dinghy? Why would you want to race that? And I went out and sailed it and was hooked. And that point on, I became a diehard Lightning sailor. And so since 97 at Pontiac Yacht Club, Cass Lake, been racing Lightnings, traveling those all over and working on those. And Lightnings are tough boats to do well in. Then, let's see, my good friend Mike Welch got me back into big boat sailing a few years back on the J35 Falcon. And been campaigning that with those guys. Last 3-4 Mackinaws and racing around the buoys with those guys when I can.
Last question. Talk a little bit about the race committee and a little bit about the race itself. I think Ugotta is well run as any race in the Great Lakes, and kind of a hidden gem. 2018 Sail World Magazine did a story about the race that if you didn't know about it, you should, and if you find out about it, you should race in it. And I think that's a fairly statement. So just
absolutely. Yeah. Travis Odenbach, one of the pros in the J70 fleet, was talking to him at the party, and he's just gushing about everything about this regatta. He's like, why is this not way up there on the radar? Because you're right, it's world-class race committees. The courses are done, they're well thought out. The communication on the water is fantastic. And our fleet, or our circles, we got mark set bots for the weekend, and just being able to have the race committee tweak courses really quickly allows us to get races off fast, efficiently, and it's a world-class racing that no one really knows about. You're absolutely right about that.
Not sure on the globe why it is, but it seems like the water's bluer and the sky's a little crisper up there than it is down here. That's not.
There's no doubt.
We love what we have down here, but it just seems like if you look at the picture behind me, it just looks like the water's bluer. But listen, I appreciate your time, and congratulations on the race. And they're not much. What's left for the season for you guys?
We've got Tuesday night J70s at Crescent every Tuesday through September. Blue Nose Regatta will be part of.
Bayview One Design?
I think, yes, we're working on getting the fleet together for the Bayview One Design. Yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, thanks for your time. Have what's left of a great summer, and enjoy yourself.
You bet. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Mark. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
You bet.
We're talking with Don Glover, a skipper of a U70 who was involved in the Ugotta Regatta up at Harbor Springs, part of the Little Traverse Yacht Club's race this past weekend. And first of all, Don, thanks for joining me, and appreciate the time. Maybe talk, we've had chat talk some of the other 70s, but let me just start with the easiest of questions. Talk a little bit about the race.
Well, we had great weather, as we always do up at Harbor Springs. I think one of the venues I enjoy the most because we have the highest number of good sailing days up there. There were a number of different conditions. Friday, we raced, wind was out of the north. We raced up into the harbor, kind of lighter and shifty. Saturday, we had breeze easily in the 15 to 20 plus range. You know, we were planing almost 100% downwind. And Sunday it went back light and came a little bit more out of the northwest. And again, another fun day in the water. So the conditions up there are great. And that's what takes me up there every year.
Is this one of the best J70 fleets put together in the Midwest for this race?
I think it's one of the best regattas. It has been. We've historically gotten 20 plus J70s up there down this last year. Maybe that's hangover from the entire COVID situation. But it's a great venue. They've also hosted the J70 Corinthians up there 2 years ago. They did a great job with that. So yeah, it's a nice place to sail, and it's a great town to be in.
One of the questions I want to ask, and it's sort of a novice question, but I ask it because there might be some folks that watch this, including me. The word Corinthian, I think of it leather, and I think of somebody with a very deep Italian voice in the old days, commercials from Ford in the old days. Explain to me what a Corinthian as it relates to sailing is.
I think there's two uses of the term. One, they refer to as a Corinthian sport, meaning it's a sport that relies on the sportsmanship and the honesty of the participants, doing your own protest, doing your own penalty turns, things of that sort. But in the context of racing, it means that you are either in the pro class, meaning you have one or more pros on board, but there are no pros on board.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there a lot of J70 pros?
There are a lot of pros that sail in the class. So I think this in the Ugotta Regatta, we had 14 boats. 5 boats had pros on them, and I think there were 9 registered in the Corinthian class. Now, there's a chance that someone might not get their registration right, but as if you go down to, for example, Davis Island series in the winter in Tampa, I would say there's, out of the 50 boats that are typically down there, easily 15 to 20 have pros on them.
I talked to Debi Schoenherr, who is the race director and the vice commodore at Little Traverse Yacht Club. She talked about the doctor, and it turns out the doctor is the weather that comes in different places. I know that weather from a ski racing perspective, both at Nubbs Knob and Boyne Highlands, but that's one of the reasons this race was unusual, because the weather was different than it has been in the past. Did that weather this year create a good scenario racing, or one that you would rather have the prevailing?
Well, I prefer the prevailing. The prevailing is, a thermal, and it comes in 11, 12 o'clock, most days, and the wind blows out of the west, and it's beautiful sailing out there. And I think everyone enjoys that. I think anyone enjoys it when you can get out and get a good solid breeze, 10, 12 knots. And we had that most of the other 2 days, or maybe a little less at times, but it wasn't problematic. I mean, the problematic is when you get skunked and you don't get to race. Just having something other than the normal thermals is just something different.
Yeah, this race involves all kinds of boats. And since we're coming off of 2 legs, where it's basically Chicago to Mac and then Port Huron to Mac, all of a sudden you're buoy racing. Does that make the general field of sailors, the racers that are up there, because it's a different venue, is there more smiles because it's just not the same thing as sitting on a rail for hours?
Well, being in the J70 fleet, we don't do the Mackinac. I mean, a lot of us sail in the Mackinac races,
right?
But we don't necessarily, certainly not on our boats. I think that we always enjoy the point-to-point. We always enjoy the windward leeward racing. That's what the J70s always do. I think that's our thing. Some people really enjoy the point-to-point racing, and the larger classes do it on a regular basis. For us, and that's what we do all the time. We don't have the sail selection issues that they have on bigger boats. We're all sailing with jib main, spinnaker, period.
I've made the comment with an interview with Mark Allen, who's another J70 sailor. I said, I sometimes think if you look at the picture behind me, when you're up at harbor, the water just seems bluer. It's just a nice place to race because you're not at home. It's a little bit different. And I've always maintained that I think Lake Michigan is a better lake than Lake Huron. And that's a personal decision with no other, basis other than my own subjective choice. But I got to think it's a great place to run. And it's also it's a well-organized race. It's been around for a long time. And I know the racing community understands Ugotta, Regatta, but I'm not sure that the rest of us have the appreciation for how good the race is. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I tell people all the time that the Ugotta Regatta is, and I sound like I'm doing a commercial for them, but it's the first race that goes on my calendar every year. I'm going to do it, unless I have a real serious conflict, because it is such a great venue.
Yeah. Will you do the upcoming bod races at Bayview and a few other races coming up?
So we may do the bod. That's a little bit up in the air right now. It just turns out that a lot of people in our fleet also race on other fleets, J120s or Lightnings, and or people are just have conflicts because of the time of the year it is this year. So we may or may not get our fleet together, but normally we do. I enjoy that. So.
Don, I have a question to ask you. I was fortunate enough to spend a season next to you at Crescent, and I watched a little bit about 70s, knew nothing much about them, but I watched how meticulous you are in the way you present the boat and the way you take care of it. And my point to you is cruising just not something that you as a racer likes because it's too slow? There seems to be, if you race, you race, and if you cruise, you don't race.
Yeah, I think that I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But I would say that I personally like to do one or the other. I'm either on a boat and I'm in full cruise mode, and I just want to have a beer in my hand and enjoy being out on the water, or I want to be in full race mode. It is one or the other, and I look forward to doing more cruising one day when I have a little more time on my hands.
You can't beer can in a J70, I would think. That'd be a little more difficult, especially as, you got to stay on top of racing that boat.
Yeah, we don't have to get the beer out until after the racing is done. We do have our own, the St. Clair fleet has its own little Tuesday night race series, as you probably know. And we go out every Tuesday night, and some people would call that beer can. We think we got a very competitive group of boats out there. It's always tight racing, and we think it's a fantastic setup.
A few years ago, when they were trying to get the fleet off the ground, there was some suggestions, and guys were going around, and there were leases available for J70s with a stadium format as part of that process. That seems to have been abandoned. Is that fair? Is that correct? Yeah,
I would say we're not doing it as much anymore. We're not doing it this year. That probably for two reasons. One, I think certainly last year with COVID, it shut things down and we never got it restarted. Second of all, our fleet's down a little bit, and that format works really well when you can have enough boats to rotate so that 3 or 4 boats can come off the water and watch the racing from the stadium, if you will, maybe grab a lunch and grab a beer maybe, and then go back out. And that's really where the format works nicely for us.
What's the best part of being on a J70? What is it you like about that boat, which I understand is a 4-person boat? You don't race it with 5, right?
Well, I always say there's either 4 Americans or 5 Italians.
Wait, you gotta explain that one.
Well, they always seem to be smaller, lighter guys.
Okay.
So if you look at the worlds, a lot of times the Italians or the Europeans put 5 on board.
Right.
In the US, they are almost exclusively raced with 4, but every now and then you'll have 5. There's no hard weight limit on the boat, but there are targets that work well, probably in the 750 range. I'm just ballpark. The breezes are up between 15 and 20, and you get the boat on a full plane. That brings a smile to everybody's faces. It's exciting, and it's just a lot of fun.
Well, if
So that would be the highlight.
If 750 is a target range, you can only put, if it were my size, you can only have 3 guys on the boat. That'd be the downside. I get that. I jokingly always said I'm a 420 crew all by myself, but that's obviously one of those discussions. Explain one thing I just wanted to ask, and it's this question it kind of came up in a couple other J70 interviews. If you look at a Melges 24 and you look at a J70, they look similar to somebody that doesn't really know the difference. Explain, because there was a huge fleet of 24s up at Ugotta, as well as the J70s. Maybe explain the difference between the two boats if you were a novice like myself.
So they're both considered sport boats. I would say the Melges is slightly larger. It's more powerful. It is going to be a little faster boat. It's often sailed with, it can be sailed with 5. It has a strict weight limit as to how much weight you can put out there. It's also requires full hiking, hiking to be competitive. And one of the specific class rules about the J70 is you're only allowed to have 2 of the crew have their legs overboard, and their torsos need to be inside the plane of the hull. So it's a much more comfortable boat to race. You don't get as much leverage with your crew weight, but the 50-year-olds can do it without having back problems. So they're both great boats. I can't tell you why the J70 took off. Maybe because it's seems like a little simpler boat, and I think it appeals to maybe a little bit older owner.
Okay. And last question, in doing some of these interviews, we've kind of come to the conclusion that campaigning the 52s and some of the bigger boats, you're talking 6 figures. I'm not going to ask you what you pay what it cost you to run, but is this an expensive summer hobby? The first question. Second question follows, is the wife know exactly what you spend on the hobby? And does it remain a wealthy man, not as a wealthy man, but somebody with a little bit of cash in the bank to campaign a boat like this for the summer? Are you amazed at the cost of what it cost, or you pretty much know what it cost?
I make a point of not adding it all up, and my wife is very supportive of it, and so I'm fortunate in that regard. But to answer your question, we do a tremendous amount of weekday racing locally. That's really very cost effective. There are sales, but the sales are a bargain compared to the bigger boats.
Right.
So I tend to buy something every year, whether it's a spinnaker or a main, or the jibs last a year or 2, depending upon how you treat them. The basic expense is taking 4 guys and going out on a weekend and getting an Airbnb or something of the sort, right, to put everybody up, and paying a regatta fee. It adds up. It does add up. It's not like having a laser and throw it on the top of your car.
So even racers it's the big hole, no different than my boat. It cost me more this year to have my auto helm installed than it did for the auto helm, which I thought was amazing because you couldn't find anybody. So you just, whatever the price was, you paid it. And then my absolute last question, what's the fastest you've ever been on that J70?
That's a good question. I should download what we got out of Ugotta last week. The highest I've heard is 22 from Mark Allen in Helium.
No, you.
And that was right before he wiped out at the finish line, 22 miles an hour.
Wow.
I know I hit 15.5 I looked up once and saw 15.5 last weekend at Ugotta. That's probably near the top of what I've done.
Okay. I get to 7.5. I think I'm on my floating front room.
Yeah.
I get to 7.5. I think my hair is going to be on fire, but I get the point. Listen, I appreciate the time and explaining some of the stuff. What we wanted to do with this week's show is kind of explain a little bit about the J70 fleet and how it kind of fits. And it's a fun boat to watch, and they're all fun to watch, but the 70s are I think a little almost like a nimble cat when you watch them from the shore. So it's been fun. So thanks.
They've been a lot of fun to own. It's been a lot of fun.
Listen, I appreciate your time. Have a great rest of the summer, and I'm sure our paths will cross.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Don, very much for your time.
Wanted to thank Debi Schoenherr and Don Glover, Mark Allen for coming aboard this week. In the upcoming weeks, we're going to be talking to a number of folks. We've got, I think, a really cool interview coming up with George Pete, who is trying to make the Olympic team with his partner, Chelsea Sims, for Paris in 2024. And we're going to get a little bit of that conversation. And we've got some exciting news coming up in the next couple of weeks about what we're going to be doing in the off season. So thank you very much for watching this week, and we'll see you next time.